Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Lyons. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Audubon, California, and we're going to give folks a few minutes to start filtering in. As you come in, we're asking you to enter in the chat your name and chapter, and if there's any other pieces of information you'd like to share with us, and then we'll step right into the agenda. We'll just give folks a few minutes to get on. We'll do our initial introductions and get right into this. Really, unlike the other 3 webinars we've done over the last couple of weeks, this one is really focusing on Advocacy Day on June 2nd and what to expect and how the day should go, and taking your questions on the policies and discussions and talking points and materials, just trying to answer all of your questions that we can. Thanks. I'm seeing a lot of folks fill in now, so that's great that everybody's joining. And we'll give folks another couple minutes and then we'll step through the agenda. This is, I will say, many of you have probably done Advocacy Day with us in the past. In the past, we've had anywhere from 60 to 80, maybe 100 members join us. This year we have, I think, over 370, or at least 360 members joining us. So it's a much bigger day. And it's kind of, it's different planning. In the past, we've put people into groups and you've had several meetings. People like Vic from Sea and Sage probably was in 4 to 6 meetings in a day. This time around, everybody will have a maximum really of 3 meetings with legislators. 1 with their local assembly member, 1 with their Senate member, and then everybody is invited to meet with Assembly Member Ash Kalra at noon. And we'll give you some more details about that scheduling and everything else. And then everybody hopefully can join us for a happy hour at 4. So we'll be talking more about the schedule and when you'll be getting that schedule for June 2nd. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background as people are still filtering in. I'll give folks 1 more minute to join us, and then we'll step into the agenda. For people that are just joining us, we're asking that you put into the chat your name and chapter affiliation if you have a chapter that you're affiliated with. It's okay if you don't. Elizabeth Osborne, I just noted that she said that she's not a member of a chapter, and that's perfectly fine, though we strongly encourage everybody to support our chapters, and you're welcome to join us. This is really for all Audubon members. Okay, well, I think it looks like the few more people are filtering in. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, Pedro, to the agenda. And as you join, if you're just joining us, please feel free to put your name in and into the chat so we can track everybody that's here. And if there are questions, like Maureen, I see that you've put a question in, we will try to capture those questions and talk about them during the Q&A at the end of the session. So we're just sort of in the introductory period right now. Again, my name is Mike Lyons. I'm the Director of Public Policy. Joining me is Pedro Hernandez, who is our Community Outreach Manager for Climate Issues. This is my son, Jack, who, okay, I'm on a call, buddy. Thank you. This is my son, Jack, who chose just now to come into the room, which is part of working at home and the new normal that we all have. We're going to wrap up with this. And then so Pedro Hernandez is our Community Outreach and Engagement Manager on climate issues. And then Juan Altamirano, who is our Associate Director and really our lead on legislative matters. And so all 3 of us will be sharing information with you and taking your questions. In a moment, we'll transition over to Pedro to be talking about the Advocacy Day overview, how the day is going to go and the expectations for the day. And then he'll pass back to Juan and me for a discussion of the policy priorities and talking points. I hope that you saw in the email today, you received an email from me or from our team today that had our Advocacy Day toolkit. In that, it had some background information about climate and the talking points and priorities, as well as some other tools. So if you haven't had a chance, we hope you'll be able to look at that. It'll have some talking points. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Pedro. Pedro, do you want to take over?
Yeah, hello everyone. Funny running into you here. Yeah, my name is Pedro. I've been helping out a lot managing our new Advocacy Day, and you know, I guess I want to start off with saying, you know, this is my first Audubon Advocacy Day, and definitely I'm going to remember that my first Advocacy Day was the largest one so far. So I'll be going over for a couple of minutes for folks who maybe have not attended our earlier webinars, just a brief overview of what our day, at least like our next couple of days will look like, and then go into specifically what June 2nd will look like as well. Our first point is that climate change is going to be the topic and priority of our 2020 Advocacy Day. Last year, we released the Survival by Degrees report, which was definitely a groundbreaking study that proved climate change is, I guess affirmed that climate change is definitely one of the most pressing threats to birds and communities. And so we have a suite of climate policies that we really want to pass, and we hope we can leverage all of our networks and collective strength to make that happen. Our goals for Advocacy Day is to present a strong Audubon voice, and I think definitely there are a lot of experienced folks in the Audubon network, but I definitely feel folks who are newer to advocacy have much to contribute as well. To activate the Audubon network safely, which again, we want to make sure that civic life is still protected and there are opportunities to grow civic engagement even when we are operating under the new normal. And also we want to build remote advocacy skills. We think this is something that can balance kind of some of the more traditional work that we've all done and definitely is still effective. But I think once, again, COVID restrictions ease up more and we're all able to be safe, we'll be even stronger advocates at the end of the day. And hopefully create and facilitate rewarding experiences for all. You know, I personally wouldn't stay in the advocacy world if this wasn't a rewarding experience, or at least for me personally, and I just hope we can share that as well with everyone. Where we're at in our calendar is on June 29th, which is our kind of last big collective kind of check-in. So today, you should be getting emails, if you haven't already, from the Audubon California staff leads. So just keep an eye out for today, and for anyone that you know that isn't on the webinar today, but still part of your chapter or group, you know, it'd be great just to give them a quick reminder that information's coming. June 1st is when we'll be finalizing our meeting list. We are still getting confirmations as we speak. You know, for folks who have been contacted by staff, you know, that's another reason to keep an eye out, just to make sure that you have the time that's set already. And on June 2nd, of course, is our Advocacy Day, which will be a mix of different webinars with your elected officials. But as I'll get into in the next slide, I believe, we have a couple of other webinars planned for you. So getting right into what the day would look like, overall, we have the day set aside for meetings. Personally, I have a meeting at 10 o'clock and 2 p.m. and folks are being scheduled anywhere in between. So just FYI, that confirmation is going to be something coming down, again, I just want to be super clear, either today or Monday at the latest. At 12 o'clock, we do have an opportunity to connect with AB 3030 author Ash Kalra, who has been the assembly member who has definitely been one of the most, or the most vocal advocates for Audubon, but also AB 3030, which is a key priority bill for us. And at 4 o'clock, we have a happy hour kind of wind down where we'll be speaking with our director, Sarah Rose, as well as other members of the Audubon team. And we are planning some special guests. Hopefully that all works out, but all the more reason to join us as well if you can. So again, let me keep going here. And I wanted to spend kind of some intentional time on this slide, just to be super clear with what we're expecting out of June 2nd and what you should expect from us as well too. So as I mentioned earlier, Audubon staff will send you an email with the time and the call-in information for your meetings. So the image on the right is for folks again who maybe have not used Zoom, an idea of what you'd be able to, where you should be expecting. There's a Zoom meeting link, which you'd click on that will take you to the video conference. And if folks for any reason have a technological issue where your computer falls into the bathtub, or I don't know, there is a phone-in option as well too, which will be provided for folks again as a backup measure. And again, we're planning 4 speakers per call. I'll clarify that this is not something that's set in stone, but generally there's 4 different themes that we'll be wanting to address as Audubon California, which is natural climate solutions, a focus of AB 3030, AB 2619, all these numbers, and also discussing the state budget. But the meeting flow, which is for folks who have been participating in previous advocacy days with Audubon or have advocated independently or separately from Audubon as well. This is generally how these meetings we're expecting them to take place. Generally, there'll be introductions where Audubon staff will introduce the purpose of our advocacy trip and give space for either the assembly member or senator to introduce himself or their staffer and yourselves as well. Of course, we'll be addressing the policy priorities, which our toolkit does have several general talking points on each of these buckets. But of course, we encourage everyone to use your own local experience and expertise and years of work through Audubon or just as an environmentalist to customize these to your own localities as well. Hopefully the staff or assembly member would have some questions for Audubon staff or yourselves as well to clarify, and there'll be a wrap up. And I wanted to discuss, or at least address the asterisk that the meetings will vary, or at least the time allocation will vary by the meeting length and the group size. So there are some groups that have 2 Audubon chapter members. There are other groups that have 20 or so. So definitely these are some internal logistics that we encourage everyone, or I guess another reason why we encourage you to connect with the Audubon staff member who'll be reaching out to you all. Again, because each group will have different dynamics and, we are tentatively scheduling meetings for half an hour. But sometimes, just to be super transparent, if a meeting has to be canceled or rescheduled or cut short to 15 minutes, for example, there will be different group dynamics. But again, we are aiming explicitly and very intentionally to schedule 30-minute blocks to provide some space for everyone to say what they would need to say.
Pedro?
Mike, go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to add just a couple things, especially for folks who have joined us in the past. In the past, we've always had this kind of same thing that Pedro's laid out, the flow of the meeting. We've asked members to be speakers on one particular set of talking points or others, and we're asking that again. So we hope that you will volunteer to be one of the speakers in your group when your team leader reaches out to you. We've also encouraged people to let the conversation be organic in that you ask them, like, what are your priorities? Where are you guys at this year? And a lot of times, in some of our most successful meetings, we've never gotten to our talking points because the members have just had such a great conversation with the participants have had such a great conversation with the legislative members or their staff. This year, because of the telephone or the video call, it's a little harder to be quite as organic. We want to still have that space. And no, if you guys have a really good conversation and you don't hit all the 4 talking points, that's okay. It's not graded. The grade is the satisfaction and the connection and the satisfaction that you get from the conversation, and that you have a chance to follow up and build a relationship with that member. So I just want to emphasize that we do want to hit our talking points, but if you find the conversation goes in another way that builds real connection, that's a great outcome as well. Thanks, Pedro.
Yes. This is Juan. Just to continue to add a little bit, to add to that is, in order, because it's a new way of participating, is many of you have done this really well, is using the chat function in that area. So not everyone is trying to talk over each other. So using the chat function to ask a question, and then the Audubon staffer can read that question off to the assembly member or the senator to prompt that question of them. But yeah, I think that the more you folks use the chat function in the scenario, the smoother the meeting will go.
Yeah, and to be clear as well, like the Audubon staff, like I kind of view our role, like at least the way I explain it to myself, is for the meetings, Audubon staff are not like the guitarists making the solo. We're like the musician technicians, like behind the scenes, making sure the electricity's on and that the mics are working and all that stuff. So we'll be there to answer questions as needed. But again, this is definitely a space again that we want to make sure everyone can feel that they're being heard. And it's not kind of every day that we can have meetings with these elected officials, even though they are public elected officials. But on that note, and kind of wrapping up on this section and transitioning to the wrap up, usually in meetings that I've run, that's the wrap up is where we say, thank you for meeting with us. We're looking forward to working with you for the rest of the legislative season. And then there's a information exchange for the best way to contact. So usually at the end, folks will come out with like the email or phone number to your office or the person that we spoke to. So the way I've always seen these meetings is kind of like a check-in, not necessarily the end-all be-all for our priorities as well. So we definitely want to encourage the continued conversation even after. And again, if we don't get to everything, that might be a good excuse to follow up with them and keep checking in more regularly if y'all feel the need. But kind of moving on again, just some quick tips. To mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Like I have 3 dogs and sometimes they go like crazy when like the mailman's passing by and stuff too. So it is just a quick reminder. And also to adjust the lighting. Usually you want your lighting source coming in from in front of you. And again, I just think that helps show that there's like someone else, like a human on the calls. And also, like, if folks again have not used Zoom before, try it out on the weekend with a friend, or call a family member with it. The best way is to always try it out and see kind of firsthand as well. Let me see. And a quick reminder on Zoom, this is just something that I pulled from their website today, is that there is going to be an update to the Zoom software that is needed by tomorrow. So just for folks who are going to be using Zoom on their cell phones or on a laptop, just make sure that you do have your software updated. I'm sure there'll be a reminder if it's not updated, but again, we just want to minimize the technological issues for the day of as well. And then just a quick reminder, follow us on social media if you are not already. we are trying to make a pretty big social media presence, but also there is, as the closer we get to the end of the legislative session and more need for support of for these policies, there's a lot of interesting content that's being created as well too. This tweet on the right-hand side is from Ash Kalra, who I mentioned earlier, who's the author of AB 3030. And a really amazing video that I believe this the one that Juan created. There's, again, we'll be creating more content. We'll be posting videos of or pictures of our meetings as well too. And we just want to make sure everyone's getting awesome information, because even aside from the advocacy webinars that we've been doing, you know, I learned the other day that our the webinars that we've been putting on to learn to draw birds reached over like 40,000 people. So there's a lot of interesting content out there. Just wrapping up again, just so we make sure we have time for any questions and answers, I'll transition to Mike to go over in more detail the policies that we have planned to support.
Thanks, Pedro. And I know a couple of people in the chat have identified that they're having a little trouble hearing us, or the sound is garbled. I'll note I was able to hear Pedro fine. If you aren't able to hear, or you feel like you're missing information, let us know. We'll try to follow up and see if there's an issue on our end. It might be your internet connection is just slow. There's a lot of traffic on internet these days, on the internet. Yeah, so Margot, if you have to disconnect, we'll try to get you any information you might have missed. So we do want to give you a quick overview on our policy priorities and the things that we will be talking about. Those of you who have joined us for the prior webinars will know, you know, we have acknowledged we are in a very different place as a state, as a people, as the human race, than we were 6 months ago when we started with our policy priorities for the year. And we want to be very mindful of that and sensitive about, you know, the deep human toll that COVID has taken, as well as the economic toll and the status that the state is in, which I'll touch on in a moment. But that doesn't mean that we sit back and our work stops, because climate change, as we'll talk about in a minute, is an existential crisis that its threats and its impacts to people and to birds and to habitats is only growing. And we know that if we don't take action now, that the kind of calamities we're already starting to see will be much worse in the future. And so we have to keep doing the work that's before us. So with that, go ahead, Pedro, we'll go to the next slide. So again, kind of giving you a sense of where we're at with our state legislature. And when we came in and COVID really started hitting in March, the legislature passed $1 billion in new spending, the state legislature did, and then they went into recess in order to abide by the state's stay-in-place order. They only came back in May, and they have cut down several of the bills that they're working on to just a much smaller number. Audubon, we alone, I think, were lead or co-lead on probably 5 bills in January. We're lucky enough to still have 2 bills that are still going strong that we'll be talking about today. So things have really changed, and the legislature is working on a very tight timeline on a lot fewer issues now. And then in June and August, right now, and Juan can mention a bit about this when we touch on the budget in a couple of minutes, you know, they're wrapping up some important legislative hearings, and the state budget started out with a $5 billion surplus planned back in January. Now we're looking at a deficit that exceeds $50 billion. And so they're having to figure out how to pass a budget now. And then also come July and August, when we start getting state tax revenues, the expectation is that there will be more cuts. And I'll talk about what that means for our priorities in a moment. Next slide, please. So where does that leave us? And the priorities that we're going to be talking about, as I just touched on, we'll be talking about natural climate solutions and why they're important, and the threat posed to deal with climate change and the threat posed by climate change. And this really harkens back to Audubon's Survival by Degrees report that came out in 2019. We'll be talking about 2 important bills that I'll touch on more in a moment. And then, as I said, we'll be focusing on the state budget and trying to protect natural resources. Next slide. So starting with the survival by degrees, if you have not seen it, there's a link in the toolkit which you should be receiving. If you, I sent out an email to all registered participants today. Also, your team leaders are providing you with the toolkit. The link is in the toolkit, but you can also Google survival by degrees, and it'll take you to the Audubon report, which has a bunch of great graphics if you haven't taken a look at it yet. But the major points that we are delivering to legislative members is that the Audubon report identifies that 2/3 of bird species in North America are at a much greater risk of extinction due to climate change. And we know that birds are excellent indicators of environmental health. So we're not just talking about birds. We talk about this massive impact of biodiversity. We're talking about mammals and insects and native plants and the rest. But we also know that about 76% of them can be saved if we engage in climate action to reduce the impacts of climate change and to build a more adaptive and resilient environment. And that adaptation and that resilience it's not just there for wildlife, it's there for people, because the impacts of climate change are immense, whether it's increased wildfires and drought, increased heat and the health risks from that. And as we've seen, with the decrease in biodiversity, which is in some way related to the COVID outbreak with the loss of biodiversity, all these things are exacerbated by climate change. And so the steps we take, which we're pushing, are natural climate solutions. And natural climate solutions are really using nature as it wants to be used, and as well as farmlands and rangelands, to sequester carbon and manage them in a more sustainable way, and to protect larger pieces of valuable habitat. And so those are our two key messages that we'll be talking about with climate, and there's some very concise talking points that are in that toolkit. And if one of you or each of your groups can step up to be that advocate on the climate issues, we'll really appreciate that. You don't have to be an expert. You can read off the talking points exactly as they're written, or you can give them your own spin. But we'll ask you to consider that. Next slide. So the next one is a piece of legislation that we are co-sponsoring with our colleagues at Defenders of Wildlife, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and Azul. And this is from Assemblymember Kalra. And many of you may remember that Assemblymember Kalra was our champion for our Migratory Bird Protection Bill last year, AB 454. That bill from Assemblymember Kalra made sure that migratory birds in California continue to be protected against incidental take or accidental killings, like from wind turbines, even though the Trump administration has now rolled back that rule at the federal level. And so Assemblymember Kalra has stepped up again to be a champion for the environment on AB 3030, which sets the goal for the state of California to permanently protect 30% of the lands and waters that occur in the state by 3030. And that is a goal that's been laid out by the UN and international scientists about what we need in order to preserve biodiversity and healthy and sustainable communities. There's more information about this in the toolkit as well. But to give you a sense, we already protect 16% of the state waters and 22% of our state lands. And this includes private lands under easement, as well as parks, national forests, all forms of permanent protection. Next slide. The next bill that we'll be talking about is Assemblymember 2619 from Assemblymember Stone. Assemblymember Stone also carried this bill last year and has been a longtime champion on our issues, environmental issues in general. The essence of this bill is that we know that California is not ready for the impacts of climate change on our coasts, whether it's increasing high tides and flooding risks and having to manage a retreat back, as well as the sort of habitat and environmental impacts that are going to occur. And both along the coastline and in the nearshore waters as ocean acidification and other impacts, which affect our fisheries and recreation, as well as overall biodiversity. So this bill is about taking some money from tideland revenues, from revenues that occur in state lands due to oil and gas leasing, and investing that and make sure that that goes into a special fund for climate resilience and adaptation on the coast to help local governments get ready for climate change. But it also makes sure that we're continuing to improve access to the coast for all Californians, because it's often becoming harder and harder for all Californians to access their shared state beaches. There's a bunch of barriers that are in the way. This fund would help reduce some of those barriers and get more people out to enjoy the outdoors, which we all share. Next slide. The last one I'm going to talk about on state budget, and I'll invite Juan to touch on this a bit, but to give you a little bit of a sense of where we're at, we are projecting statewide. We started with about 4% unemployment in the state. We're now looking at, in 2020, we're now looking at a projection of 18% unemployment, and it could spike even higher than that. As I said, we started with a budget that planned several new investments in climate and natural resources. And even with those new investments, we planned for a $5.6 billion surplus from the governor. Right now, we're looking at something over $50 billion in deficit, even with some reserve usage to offset that. So what does that mean? Is it already, we've seen a revised version of the budget from the governor's office. The legislature is now looking at it. And that has taken away $30 million from Department of Fish and Wildlife and a large chunk of money from a bunch of other priorities that we are all concerned about. We want to make sure that those cuts don't go further and deeper, or that the natural resource programs do not take an undue level of cuts. We know from the 2008 recession that there were significant cuts that went sort of first and hardest to the natural resources and Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they left a legacy of, frankly, dysfunction and the inability to manage natural resources in the state. We know cuts are inevitable, but the message that we're sending to legislators is, as we're doing this, don't forget the importance of the environment. Don't forget the importance of biodiversity. Don't forget the importance of the natural climate solutions and nature to deal with climate change. And also just to make sure, especially at a time where we're all locked in our houses, that people have safe and accessible places to go to use and enjoy nature. And so those are our main talking points for those 4 issues. Juan, do you want to add on anything on the budget or any of the issues that I just raised?
Yes. So one of the things that I think is imperative that we stress on this is that Senate and the Senate and the Assembly budget committees are in the thick of negotiating the budget with the governor. Last night, there has been a move from the Senate to reject most of the cuts outlined by the governor. And so I think that creates an opportunity for us, especially in the natural resources space, to drive that message home drive that message home in making sure that we communicate with our legislators about the importance of protecting natural resources. And in addition to this, these talking points, one of the things that we will be circulating within offices, but I think is going to be important to emphasize this, is a letter with all our asks associated with this, which is going to be, we're going to be responsible for that and making sure that they get delivered to those offices. But the point is here, we have an incredible opportunity to make sure that we advocate and protect and probably move the needle on making sure that our natural resources here in California are protected in that cut.
Thanks, Juan. And really, I want to emphasize that Juan has been doing a ton of work. It's really difficult to do this kind of lobbying work and advocacy work remotely at this point. Usually at this point, we're running around in the building, having a lot of meetings one-on-one. And that really leads us to this kind of new opportunity we have with the Advocacy Day itself for all of you to be meeting virtually with staff and hopefully as many members as we can get. So it is really important, even if you do not have a speaking role, even if you just attend the calls that you're for your district, to show up and to show up in numbers really leaves a strong impact and sends a very clear message. And so I want to really emphasize that even if you don't have a speaking role in these calls, that you are still having an impact by joining us and participating. So I think that's it on the major priorities. I'm sure we're going to have some questions about these as we go forward, but we wanted to make sure there's ample time for Q&A today. So unless I missed anything, Pedro and Juan, we can open it up to questions. If folks would like to type their questions into the chat, we'll read them back to everybody and answer them as best we can. So Georgette has asked that she's concerned that she has not yet heard from her team leader, And the team leaders are sending emails out today to everybody who registered for Advocacy Day. You've been assigned to an Audubon staff person who's a team leader, and they are putting together emails to go out to all of you. So you should be hearing from them by, I would say, the close of business today. And if you don't, feel free to email me. Pedro and I have our emails at the end of this. I'm mike.lyons@audubon.org. And we'll make sure, we'll kind of cross-reference and figure out why you didn't get that email yet, and make sure that you get the information that you need. I also sent out, and it sounds like not everybody got it, but an email went out today to everybody who registered for Advocacy Day that has the toolkit and some additional information. I sent that out to everybody. It might have gone into your spam boxes or whatever you use to filter, because you maybe get too many emails from Audubon. Not Audubon California, I'm sure, but you might want to just check to see if your filtering or spam did that. But again, if you didn't get an email and you know you registered, please email us and we'll make sure you get the info. So, Andrea Adams asked if I'm not speaking, can you make comments in the dialogue? And Pedro, do you want to take this about kind of expectations for use of the chat?
Sure. Yeah, and I think, well, definitely that is, a feature. And again, I personally, if I was running a meeting, I would make sure, like, again, and everyone will have different flows, like I mentioned earlier, but I would at least try to plan for at least like going into meetings with maybe a portion set aside for just like other general points or comments that came up. Because again, there can be a lot of things to latch onto in a conversation with the staffer or assembly member. So I would just, personally advise to plan with a little bit of a window or cushion, so folks can weigh in. I'll also say that folks can also keep calling the assembly member's office as well too.
I'll get to that.
Yeah. So or even just like help activate other chapters or chapter members. So I think there's, personally, I would say there's a lot of other things that could help support this leading up and beyond as well. So as an organizer, that's where I go. Yeah.
So, and I want to just touch a little bit more on the use of the chat, and a couple requests we'd make is one, we'd like to keep, these are short meetings for Advocacy Day, and to the fullest extent possible, we want to keep the focus of the questions back and forth on the major talking points. Certainly, if there's a local issue that you want to raise with your legislator, you should feel free. This is your meeting to do that. I think where we probably don't want to engage too broadly is like getting into federal politics or that sort of thing. I think it'll take away from the focus of the meeting. And frankly, I think the legislator or the legislative staffer won't know how to respond. If you start asking them about something the Trump administration is doing, they're going to feel like that's sort of beyond the purview of that particular call. So I would focus on our talking points on the state budget. If there's a local issue of development or a park or something, that's appropriate to bring up. But we just ask you to kind of think about those in those terms. And then also to be using, whether you're speaking or in chat, to always be respectful. There are going to be members that some of our teams will be meeting with who don't vote the way Audubon would want them to vote. And yet they're still taking a meeting with us, and they're still hearing from legislators. And if they say, you know what, we're not going to support that bill, then we say, okay, well, we'll hope you'll change your mind and we'll follow up with you. And we leave it at that. We don't enter into debate or criticize them during that meeting. Just give them space and appreciate that they've taken the time to meet with us. Because frankly, sometimes some of these offices that don't vote the way we want them to vote, they just don't meet with us. And what we're finding is many of them are being willing to meet, especially at a time like this. And we want to let them know we appreciate that even if we disagree. And we'll get, Pedro brought up a good point, and I'm going to jump around a little bit on some of these questions, but there was a question that if we don't have a meeting assigned to us, will we be assigned 2 other meetings? And for the most part, no. We're trying to get at least 1 meeting for everybody who registered, but there are hundreds of people that have registered for this, and to try to shift everybody around and make sure everybody has the proper invites to their alternate meetings is not going to work. Where we've kind of expanded it to bring other people in is there are times where there's only 1 or 2 people. There's a situation with a vacant assembly spot where we have a constituent who wouldn't have anybody to meet with in the assembly. So we've shifted them, we're shifting them to other meetings the best that we can. If you don't have a meeting, like if you, for somehow you don't get any meetings, or you only have 1, you will tell you like your assembly member, was unable to meet with you, or the office was unable to meet with you on this day, but we'll give you the phone number and an email and ask you to call the office and say, hey, we hope to meet with you today. We didn't get to, but I'm from Audubon and I'm a constituent, and we hope you'll support AB 3030 and AB 2619, or something along those lines to take action on the 2nd. So there's still things you can do even if you don't get those meetings. I'm gonna scroll down a bit. Oh, go ahead, Pedro.
Yeah, I mean, there's just again, to be the ever optimist, there might be the possibility of, that maybe the June 2nd might not work for the office, but potentially another day during the week or, soon thereafter. So again, I don't want to overpromise, but again, that is a possibility for why maybe just on the 2nd there might not be a meeting. I mean, we might again just get a complete like no, or just like nothing, no response. But again, that could be a potential.
Great. Sorry, I'm trying to answer an individual question that came from a member. So I'm going to read off some more questions right now. So there was a question about registering for the webinars and Advocacy Day, and Dan Devine provided a separate link. Yes, the registration for the webinars was separate than registration for Advocacy Day itself, because we knew we'd have somewhat of a different audience for both, and we wanted to make sure more people had an opportunity to join us for the webinars and didn't feel like they had to commit to Advocacy Day in order to do that. I'm sorry, Susan Shakely asked that we haven't mentioned SB 45, which is a proposed bond. And the reason that we've sort of taken that off the list is that when the governor's budget came out a couple weeks ago, the revised budget, the governor basically said there's not going to be a bond. We're not going to do that this year, and closed the door on that. And I think, and Juan, maybe you can speak a bit to this. We've gotten some mixed messages from the legislature. We're continuing to work on bond vehicles, but they've been recharacterized from natural resources and climate to be more sort of focused on economic stimulus. And so we're engaged on that, but the conversations are such that they're frankly more sensitive, and we're trying to be kind of adopt a more nuanced approach with that. Juan, do you want to talk a little bit about the bond and if it comes up during the calls?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we need to remember, as Mike said, is that there's a lot of confusion what's going on, and because of the uncertainty of the economy, what we are looking at is that multiple industries or sectors are wanting different financing vehicles, right? And so there's multiple ideas of different bonds. So, and what we don't want to get into is this notion of, let's choose one bond over the other, which is why it's incredibly important to concentrate on the state budget. Right now, like I said, there is this notion of there's a disconnect between the administration and the state and state assembly and state senate on how we can proceed in funding natural resources. And I think by and large, we have a little more of an allyship with the Senate and the Assembly offices than we do with the administration currently. And so the importance of this now is not to get caught up in this notion of bonds. We need to just pressure the legislature to get us investments that are for more for sure, in a general budget than any future discussion, because that discussion can take place still in October, right? What we're looking at is a more time-constrained area. By June 15th, we have to have a state budget passed, and that's going to determine a lot of the resources that the environment gets in the short term.
Thanks, Juan. We have another question from, I mean, if you guys, by the way, if you get asked by the legislator on the bond, say that Audubon has supported it and continues to work on it, and we think, you know, these are important tools, especially as revenues have dried up, and that we know that things like investments in the environment and natural climate solutions have significant economic benefits for communities and for the state. So we're still supportive of it, but we're sort of kind of seeing how it's playing out and contributing where we can. Douglas had a question about whether you would be assigned to a team for your own assembly member. And yes, Douglas, that's why actually, so I was mentioning that those of you who joined us in the past often had 5 or 6 meetings over the course of the day. 1 or 2 of those are with your particular legislator, and then you kind of shared meetings with other Audubon members that had come to Sacramento with you. This year, really the offices mainly just want to meet with constituents first and foremost. And also we had so many more, we had, I think 3 to 4 times the number of people sign up for Advocacy Day this year than we've had in prior years. And so by and large, we have a lot of people that are already constituents joining calls. And so, and also we thought it'd be easier on you as participants if you only had 2 or 3 calls maximum in the day. And so the goal is that everybody gets 1 meeting with their assembly member, 1 meeting with their senator. Everybody joins for the call with Ash Kalra at noon, and then can join us for the happy hour. So it's a lighter workload than those of you who've joined us in Sacramento in the past. I see if I missed any questions. Carol was raising issues around solar. I'm not sure about the question though, Carol, so maybe if you could provide me with a shorter question. So there was a question of someone not being from an Audubon chapter, and really it's anybody that wants to join and is willing to participate and speak up. You don't have to be a chapter member. I presume you're an Audubon member, so anybody can be part of the call and contribute if you're registered for Advocacy Day. If you're on this call and didn't register for Advocacy Day and don't want to participate in the calls, please at least follow us on the social media, and you can repost and retweet what we put out in support of AB 3030 and 2619 and Action for Birds on Climate.
One question I think that might not gotten answered or had some clarity is how we're doing how we're setting up the meetings, and it's based on your zip code of where you live and where that member on the Assembly or the Senate represents. So that's how we're prioritizing those meetings for those people, because members of the elected officials want to meet with their constituents and at times have asked us for their zip code. So that's how we're categorizing and looking for those meetings to set up meetings for folks.
Right, and I think that answers the question that Carolyn had about how do you decide which Audubon members meet with which representative. We actually took for everybody who registered your zip codes and connected them with the legislative offices. So it's not random. You're meeting with the person that runs for office in your district that represents you in Sacramento. So it's a very powerful connection. Georgette asked, when will Advocacy Day start and end? So Pedro gave a kind of outline that the meetings can start anytime really after 9 o'clock and 9 a.m. in the morning on the 2nd. And we would expect them to be wrapped up by 4 o'clock. I know there's at least one that I helped schedule. It's 4:30. That's the only time that the member can meet with us, but that's okay. But most will be done by 4, and then you're invited to join us for sort of a happy hour and debrief and a little bit more of a party, hopefully, at 4 o'clock. So that's kind of the timing for Advocacy Day on the 2nd. There's a question from Maureen about whether we have a priority about not letting COVID lead to regulatory relief for industries. And that has certainly been part of Audubon's advocacy. We've done a lot of advocacy around COVID. both proactive and reactive. On the proactive side, we've signed on to things like trying to prevent shutoffs to water and utilities during the crisis, just to support making sure that Californians continue to have access to clean and affordable drinking water during this crisis and the economic downturn. So we've engaged on that, where we've also signed in on letters about pushing back on industry groups that have been asking for regulatory relief in a variety of different ways. For example, on regulating wetlands, developers have asked to delay rules in California that would backstop some of the Trump administration's rollbacks. So we've done that. If it comes up, it's certainly fine to mention that or raise that issue with them. There's not a lot of specific bills to weigh in on that right now. So I think just carrying the sentiment that the environment continues to be very important, even during what might seem to be just a public health and economic crisis, that protections for the environment really protect everybody, and they protect us into the future. That's certainly a great message to always deliver, but we won't have a specific talking point about pushing back on the regulatory relief requests. Vic asked, are there any specific bills that deal with natural climate solutions? And this is one of the situations where we had at least a couple other bills at the beginning of the year that specifically were implementing natural climate solution programs, creating them. But the strongest one, well, both AB 3030 and 2619 deal with natural climate solutions. Just setting the goal for the state to be ambitious about protecting lands and waters through a variety of ways. That will also include working land solutions and easements, as well as protection of important things like wildlife corridors to allow for migration, and lands, hopefully more lands in urban environments that provide cleaner air and cleaner water and shade for residents in more urban communities or disadvantaged communities that have lacked access to green space. So yes, Vic, 3030 is very much a natural climate solutions bill. 2619 does the same by focusing on wetlands and other natural solutions on the coast. That investment for adaptation and resilience in the bill specifically calls out natural climate solutions as part of the priorities about how that money should be spent. I'm not seeing, I don't know if I missed anybody's questions. Do we have a list of environmental actions that have been good for the environment? Environmental actions that have been good for the economy. You know, we don't have that, I mean, Carol, we haven't provided that to you in the toolkit. We definitely have a lot of information about just what tourism has provided, ecotourism and birding and the kind of investments that those provide on local communities. We know that natural areas increase home values and do a lot of other things like that, as well as things like providing the cleaner air, cleaner water, and cleaner food. We don't have specific sort of information in the toolkit for you guys to throw out. If you want to gather some of that and include that in your comments in the chat, I'll make a note of that here and see if that's something we can add, but I don't want to throw a bunch of new information in the mix. But that's a really good point, and it's always good to be bringing that up with legislators. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Carol. Let's see. Okay. So Bettina asked about that the governor rolled back the plastic bag ban, and is there anything done to get that back? Juan, I'll pass that off to you. My guess is, Bettina, not this year, but I'll pass on to Juan.
Yeah, so he rolled it back temporarily, and that's only during listening to his health experts and what they're saying is to try to minimize the amount of cross contamination. So I'm not necessarily too worried for this year. Obviously, it's not a good situation that we're in. However, I think in the long term, that will come back again.
Yeah, there certainly is. And there's talk about, a ballot measure, a new proposition to deal with plastics. I think that's unlikely to go forward this year. Or maybe it's completely off the books by this point. But we may have that delay, but I'd say the issue on plastic is not done in California. And I frankly like our momentum. I think where I think the state and the politics are headed in the right direction to start tackling this. And there's other issues that folks have raised, like pesticides. We started wanting to get in more into the pesticide issues this year, and then COVID kind of delayed that as well. But I do know that even as this is happening, that we're seeing some reforms happen internally at the agency that handles pesticides. And my hope is that for next year's Advocacy Day, that we're going to be able to tackle some of the issues that got tabled this year, like natural climate solutions, like plastic, and like some of these other natural climate solutions that the bills we weren't able to pursue this year, and like pesticides. So I'm going to scroll up. I don't know, Pedro or Dan, if I missed anybody's questions. I just want to reiterate that everybody registered for Advocacy Day should have gotten an email from me today laying out a little bit of what's going to happen over the next few days with the toolkit attached. If you didn't, if you registered, Dan provided a link to check your registration in the chat. If you registered and didn't get that, please check your spam, but also just email me and I will make sure you get the toolkit. So that's one. Two, you should hear today from your Audubon team staff leader, just introducing themselves and providing a bit more information about what to expect. The third is we are continuing to register and get confirmation back for calendaring and scheduling meetings for everybody. We're trying to get them as many as we can for as many of you as we can. We know that not everybody may get a meeting, but there's still action that you can take by calling your legislator, and we'll give you that phone number if you don't get a meeting with them, to let them know about your priorities. And then everybody is welcome to join us, regardless of the number of meetings you have, for a special session with Ash Kalra at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, and then the happy hour led by our executive director, Sarah Rose, at 4 o'clock. Let's see, there may be a few more questions down here. Now people are throwing the questions out as I was wrapping up. There's a agreement on pesticides. I hear you, Rachel. It keeps me up at night. And rodenticides, yes. And then, oh great, and people are starting to see that they're getting the toolkit. So that's good. So this is, we have a few more minutes now. If anybody else has any more further questions. Also, Pedro has put up our email addresses, and feel free to put those down. On the day of the event, or even before then, if you have any technical questions about Zoom or how to connect, Dan Devine, who has been answering questions in the chat, is a technical wizard and also a super nice guy. So those two things don't always go together. And he's happy to help you and can walk you through. He's been a huge help to Pedro and me through this process, and making sure these webinars go smoothly. And so reach out to Dan and he can help you make sure that you know what to do for getting Zoom and getting online. If you have not signed up yet, Linda Marquez asked, if you have not signed up yet, can you still? Linda, I will encourage you to sign up. I will do my best to make sure you get in the right group. It is late, but we don't want to close the door on anybody that wants to participate. So just be patient with us if it takes us a little bit to work you into the fold. So thanks for the interest. Pedro or Juan or Dan, would you guys have anything that you guys would like to add that maybe we forgot to cover before we wrap up in a minute or two?
Just thank you so much for everything that you're doing and coming, trying to be part of this solutions in this new post world that we're living in. We certainly appreciate it, and I know members from the Assembly and the Senate are going to appreciate it because this is what they want. Your feedback is incredibly important to them to be able to make sure that they are listening to their constituents and making the right decisions. And I'm really grateful and thankful for everyone who signed up to be part of this, and we look forward to hearing all the positive results afterwards.
Yeah, and I would just like to add a round of appreciation for everyone who's joined us in these webinars so far. You know, there's been a very sizable and dedicated crowd as well to each one. So definitely, I think just like Audubon trying this process and this virtual advocacy for the first time, and you know, it's definitely, you know, leaves me with some hope that folks are interested. And you know, I hope to assure you all that, you know, this is our first time doing this. It might not be our last time, but we're definitely learning a lot of lessons to make our next rounds of advocacy even more smooth and impactful as well. Because again, like from my experience, advocacy works. So I'm looking very forward to, you know, continuing building our relationship and seeing where else we can go at from this. So thank you all again.
Thank you, guys. And I'll, you know, one thing I'm going to think about, Lawrence and Linda mentioning about signing up late, and maybe Rachel, we've had to work with a date. You know, we don't get real-time updates from this list as folks register. And so I'm going to ask anybody on this call, if you registered after Tuesday, will you please just send me an email so I have your name separately so I can make sure that you're in that list? Because I just, you know, I want to make sure we're as inclusive as possible of everybody who wants to join. So my email is up here. If you didn't sign up last week and you only signed up since Tuesday, you may not be in our member list, and I'll try my best to get you where you need to be and hopefully get you some meetings. And we'll do the best we can. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll go ahead and sign off now. Follow up with questions, and we're looking forward to Tuesday. Take care.